He was moments away from being sentenced to life in prison until two homeless twin girls stormed the courtroom with proof that silenced everyone, including the judge. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and silent onlookers. All eyes were fixed on the young man sitting at the defense table, his wrists free of cuffs, but his future shackled by the weight of the accusations against him. Sayer Grave, 28, billionaire founder of Gravionics, one of the fastest-growing tech empires in America, sat motionless as the prosecution laid out its case. His tailored suit, perfect posture, and calm exterior couldn't mask the storm brewing behind his gray eyes. He had built his company from nothing, just an idea in his dorm room and a worn-out laptop. Within 5 years, he'd become one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. But now, all of that was crumbling. The government accused him of orchestrating a massive charity fraud scheme, laundering millions from a children's medical relief fund that Gravionics had proudly sponsored. According to the prosecution, Sayer had rerouted donations into offshore accounts, covering it all up with forged documents. A projection screen behind the prosecutor displayed graphs, financial ledgers, and forged emails. This man, the prosecutor thundered, used dying children as a front to steal money and pad his empire. He's not a genius. He's a criminal in a $1,000 suit, the audience murmured. Some gasped, others whispered. Sayer clenched his jaw but said nothing. He had been advised not to testify. The world had already decided his guilt based on headlines and social media clips. No one wanted to hear his side. No one cared that he'd fired his CFO months before the allegations surfaced. No one mentioned the missing hard drive from his private server. His attorney, court-appointed after his entire legal team resigned overnight without explanation, seemed tired and disinterested. He barely questioned witnesses, didn't object when the prosecution twisted the narrative, and never once looked Sayer in the eye. Sayer glanced toward the judge. Blythe Havershaw, a sharp-eyed woman known for her no-nonsense rulings and low tolerance for theatrics. She showed no emotion, not sympathy, not doubt, just procedure. As the court adjourned for the day, Sayer rose quietly, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. A dozen cameras flashed as he walked out with a guard. He ignored them. He ignored the shouts, because in his mind, the real question wasn't whether he would be found guilty. It was, who had set him up? And why did it feel like the answer was hidden in plain sight? The subway tunnel was cold, even in the heart of summer. Air hissed through rusted vents as trains rumbled far above the platform. Two small figures huddled near an old maintenance grate behind a forgotten stairwell, hidden in shadows where no one ever looked. Tally and Myron Maddox had been living there for months, identical twin girls just 9 years old, their clothes patched with mismatched scraps, their shoes 2 sizes too big and falling apart. No one noticed them. No one ever asked their names. They were ghosts in the city that had forgotten how to care. Their mother, a soft-spoken woman named Rhea, had died 2 winters ago in a shelter that reeked of mold and hopelessness. Before she passed, she'd clutched a worn leather pouch to her chest, whispering something to Tally in a voice cracked by fever. If anything happens, open this. Only if you're really in trouble, and find him. He'll help you. At the time, Tally didn't know who he was. The pouch had remained hidden in the lining of her backpack, untouched, almost sacred. They had survived by begging, collecting cans, and on rare occasions, sleeping in soup kitchens. Myron had fallen ill once, a nasty flu, but Tally had traded her only blanket for some leftover antibiotics from a street vendor. They didn't talk about that winter much. That night, as the 2 girls shared a stale granola bar and leaned against each other for warmth, a flickering light caught Tally's eye. Across the platform, behind a locked metal gate, a dusty TV sat inside a broken electronics store. The news was on, and she could just barely hear the voice through the cracked glass. Day 3 of the high-profile trial of tech billionaire Sayer Grave continues tomorrow. Grave faces charges of... The camera zoomed in on his face. Myron stopped chewing. "That's him," she whispered. Tally's heart jumped. She scrambled closer, pressing her nose to the bars. The man on the screen, sharp jaw, serious eyes, that small scar above his eyebrow. She remembered him, not from a screen, from a hallway, from a voice in the dark. 2 years ago, after their mother died, a man had come to the shelter. He never said his name, just gave Rhea an envelope and told her, "This should help, but if anything happens, tell the girls to keep it safe." That man was Sayer Grave. Tally's hands trembled as she unzipped the secret lining in her backpack. The pouch was still there. Inside, a crumpled letter, a flash drive, a few strange-looking checks she'd never understood, and a photo of their mother smiling, standing beside Sayer. Myron looked at her sister. "He's in trouble. Maybe big trouble." Tally nodded. "And maybe we're the only ones who can help." They sat in silence for a long moment, the noise of the subway washing over them. And then, without another word, the girls stood, zipped their bags, and started walking. Not to beg, not to hide. They were going to find the courthouse. The courthouse loomed like a fortress. Gray stone walls, iron railings, and a front staircase that seemed to stretch forever. Tally and Myron stood at the base, looking up. They were used to being invisible, blending into crowds, slipping past locked doors. But this was different. The envelope they carried felt heavier than ever before. Inside were the things their mother had hidden away. A handwritten letter, a photo, a flash drive, and several odd documents that no one had ever explained. Tally held them close under her coat, her fingers tightening every time she thought about what they meant. They didn't know where to start. They couldn't read most of the documents. They were filled with technical words, numbers, names. But one thing stood out: a scanned ID badge with the name Hubert Farrow and the Gravionics logo stamped beside it. That name had popped up briefly during the news report. He was mentioned as a former employee of Sayergrave, fired quietly years ago. What the twins didn't know was that Hubert Farrow had been the company's chief financial officer and the mastermind behind the real fraud. The documents in their hands included internal emails sent from a secret account, bank transfers to shell companies, and a digital audio file on the flash drive. Myron had plugged it into a library computer earlier that day. The recording was scratchy but clear enough. It was a voice. Adult, male, impatient. "I told you, bury the trail under Sayer's name. He doesn't check the relief fund reports. He trusts me. That's the beauty of it." They didn't know it yet, but this single clip had the power to blow open the entire case. But how would two homeless children even get anyone to listen? After circling the courthouse 3 times, they found a side entrance. A large security guard was eating a sandwich and scrolling on his phone. He barely noticed them at first. Tally walked up bravely, her chin high even though her heart thudded in her chest. "Sir," she said, "we need to speak to the judge. It's about Mr. Graves' case. We have proof he's innocent." The guard didn't even look up. "Back off, kid. Go home." "We don't have a home," Myron said quietly. That made him glance up. He hesitated, probably debating whether to chase them off or call someone. But then he saw Tally's face, the way she held the envelope, the seriousness in her small, worn-out eyes. "Wait here," he muttered, picking up his radio. Minutes passed, then more minutes. A woman in a gray suit eventually appeared. She knelt down in front of the girls and spoke gently. "I'm Assistant Bailiff Martinez. What do you have?" Tally pulled out the flash drive and documents. "This belonged to our mother. Mr. Grave helped her once. And these papers, they show someone else did everything. Not him." Martinez took them without a word. Her expression had shifted. Not pity, not dismissal, but concern. Real concern. "I'll take these to Judge Havershaw," she said, "but you girls need to stay close. You understand me? Don't disappear." "We won't," Tally whispered. As Martinez walked away, Myron looked up at the massive building again. "You think she'll believe us?" Tally didn't answer right away. She just looked down at the worn photo in her hand, the one of their mother and the man who had once saved them, without even knowing who they were. "She has to," she said, "because if she doesn't, he'll go to prison for the rest of his life." Morning sunlight filtered through the high windows of the courtroom as the bailiff called the room to order. Spectators filled the benches, murmuring with barely restrained curiosity. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked softly, and at the center of it all, Sayer Graves sat straight-backed and expressionless. The weight of his name, his fortune, and his impending sentence clung to the air like smoke. Judge Blythe Havershaw entered with her usual solemn poise, her gavel tapping once with finality. "We will now resume proceedings in the matter of the state versus Sayer Graveson Grave," she announced. "The defense may make a final statement before sentencing." Sayer's court-appointed lawyer stood awkwardly, glanced once at Sayer, and began reading from a folded piece of paper with all the enthusiasm of a tired clerk. Sayer didn't even listen. His eyes had drifted to the door behind the courtroom. the same door through which witnesses were let in. He had accepted his fate. Whatever had happened, whoever had done this to him had covered their tracks too well. And without proof, the world would keep believing he was the villain. But just as Judge Havershaw lifted her hand to speak again, the back door burst open. Two small girls stormed in, nearly colliding with a guard. Tally and Myron, dirty, trembling, clutching the same old envelope they had carried for days, ignored the gasps from the crowd. "Stop!" Tally's voice cracked but rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. "He didn't do it. We have proof!" The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order! Order in the court!" The bailiff moved to remove the girls, but Judge Havershaw raised a hand, narrowing her eyes. "Who are you?" Tally was breathless but steady. "We're Tally and Myron Maddox. Our mother, and she knew him. He helped her once. Before she died, she gave us this." She held up the envelope with both hands. "It proves someone else stole the money, not Mr. Grave." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the prosecutor stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The judge looked at Bailiff Martinez, who had quietly entered behind the girls. Martinez nodded once. "Your Honor, the documents and audio file they submitted yesterday were delivered to your office for review this morning. I verified chain of custody and requested analysis." Judge Havershaw looked down at her bench, pulled out a sealed manila folder, and opened it. Her eyes scanned the contents for several long, tense seconds. Then, something remarkable happened. Her face changed. Her usually unreadable expression cracked. The faintest narrowing of her eyes, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. She looked up. "I've reviewed the flash drive and supporting documents," she said. "They include audio recordings of a former Gravionics executive instructing subordinates to falsify financial reports, as well as evidence of embezzlement routed through third-party fronts, none of which bear the digital signature of the defendant." A low wave of whispers swept through the gallery. The prosecutor jumped up. "Your Honor, these so-called witnesses are children. They can't possibly—" "Silence," she snapped. "You will not interrupt me again." She turned to the twins. "Who gave you this information?" "Our mom," Tally said softly. "She died, but she said if we were ever in trouble, to find him. We didn't know who he was until we saw him on TV." Judge Havershaw looked back at Sayer. His face was pale, eyes wide. His mouth opened, but no words came. "I am hereby suspending sentencing," the judge declared. "The court will reconvene after further investigation. Mr. Grave, for now, you are free to leave under supervised release." The gavel struck. The room erupted, some gasping, others clapping, some outraged. But Sayer didn't hear any of it. He stood slowly, then turned to face the girls at the back of the room. Tally and Myron stared at him. Myron clutched her sister's sleeve. Neither of them moved. Sayer walked toward them, step by step. When he finally reached them, he knelt down. His voice was hoarse. You saved my life." Tally blinked back tears. "You saved ours first." He didn't ask any more questions. He didn't need to. He opened his arms, and both girls fell into them without hesitation. And for the first time in years, the billionaire who had everything finally felt something real. Hubert Farrow was nowhere to be found. The day after the courtroom chaos, reporters swarmed the courthouse, demanding answers. News stations replayed the footage of Tally and Myron bursting into the courtroom like it was a movie scene. Sayer Graves' name was no longer paired with the words fraud and greed. It was now surrounded by speculation, doubt, and something close to sympathy. Judge Havershaw had ordered an immediate re-examination of the case, this time with a special independent investigator assigned. The flash drive from the twins was sent to federal forensic analysts. The evidence was damning. Not only did it confirm Farrow's voice on the recording, it matched routing numbers to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Hong Kong, accounts directly linked to shell companies managed by aliases tied to Hubert Farrow. 2 days later, a federal warrant for Farrow's arrest was issued. But he had already fled. What no one outside Gravionics had known was that Farrow had spent the last 2 years carefully covering his tracks. After his quiet termination from the company, a move Sayer had made discreetly after catching vague inconsistencies in quarterly reports, Farrow had spun a web of lies. He leaked manipulated documents to a contact inside the State Tax Bureau, knowing that once authorities caught wind of the fabricated irregularities, they'd launch an investigation. and traced the entire thing back to Sayer. It had worked, almost perfectly. But what Pharaoh didn't expect, and what no one could have, was that two street-dwelling little girls would blow it all apart. Sayer sat in a quiet conference room in Gravionic's headquarters, no longer surrounded by lawyers or PR handlers. Across from him were two FBI agents and an agent from the Financial Crimes Division. A whiteboard was filled with a dizzying flowchart of transactions and forged communications. At the center of it all, Hubert Pharaoh's face. "This man was meticulous," said Agent Claiborne, tapping the board. "We've tracked no fewer than 6 false identities, 3 burner phones, and several real estate deals under ghost companies. He disappeared the morning after your trial began. But thanks to the documents provided by your witnesses," he glanced briefly at the twins, sitting quietly with juice boxes in the corner, "we've narrowed him to 3 possible exit points. He was spotted on a traffic camera headed toward a private airfield in Jersey." Sayer folded his hands. "Find him. Whatever it takes." Claiborne nodded. "We will. You have our word." Meanwhile, the media had shifted tone completely. Overnight, Sayer's name was rehabilitated. News anchors now described him as the wrongfully accused visionary and a man betrayed from within. But Sayer didn't care about redemption in headlines. He was focused on one thing only: justice. On the 3rd day of the renewed investigation, Judge Havershaw reconvened court. This time, Sayer walked in not as a defendant, but as a guest of the court. And in front of packed benches, she announced, "This court finds that the original charges against Mr. Sayer Grave were based on falsified evidence and fraudulent documentation. The case is hereby dismissed with prejudice." Sayer didn't smile, not once, because he knew this wasn't the end. Not until Pharaoh was in handcuffs. Not until the system that allowed it all to happen was exposed. But after court was adjourned, Sayer turned to Tally and Mirren, who stood near the back, a bit overwhelmed by the attention. He knelt to meet them at eye level. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. "But I know one thing: I will never let either of you go hungry, cold, or scared again. That's a promise." Tally looked at him, her eyes shining with cautious hope. "You believe in promises?" she whispered. Sayer nodded. "Only the ones that matter." The press tried to swarm them outside. Cameras flashed, questions flew. But Sayer wrapped an arm around both girls and walked past them all, silent, focused. He wasn't a tech titan right now. Not a media figure. Not a headline. He was just a man walking out of the fire. With the 2 people who pulled him from the ashes. The house was nothing like the towering glass penthouse Sayer Grave had once called home. It sat at the edge of a quiet, tree-lined road just outside the city. An old farmhouse renovated with warm wood panels, large windows that let in sunlight, and a wraparound porch where wildflowers grew in mismatched pots. For the first time in years, Sayer had chosen something not for prestige, but for peace. He watched through the kitchen window as Tally and Mirren ran barefoot through the backyard, chasing a stray orange kitten they'd found by the fence. The girls had been living with him for only a week, but already they had brought a kind of presence into the house that no amount of wealth had ever been able to offer. Laughter echoed where silence used to settle like dust. He had formally filed to become their guardian 2 days after the case was dismissed. The state moved faster than expected. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of sympathy. The girls had no other family, no birth records of a father, and with the public now aware of their role in his exoneration, officials were eager to give them protection. But Sayer hadn't taken them in out of obligation. He'd made a choice. The same man who once built machines to predict human behavior had been saved by something wildly unpredictable. Compassion. Not logic, not code, but raw, undeserved kindness from 2 children who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Inside the house, the kitchen was filled with smells unfamiliar to Sayer. Cinnamon, warm bread, and melted cheese. Their live-in helper, Miss Eleanor, a retired foster mother with a fierce heart and a soft voice, had insisted on making real food instead of whatever frozen packages Sayer was used to heating up in his old life. "You don't feed kids with data charts," she told him the first morning. "You feed them with love, breakfast, and boundaries." And so, slowly, Sayer began to learn. He learned that Tally liked to sleep with the light on but hated loud voices, that Mirren would always give her food away if someone looked hungrier, that neither of them had ever had a birthday party or their own toothbrush, or a room they could lock from the inside. He bought them matching nightlights, soft comforters in colors they chose, and a bookcase stacked with new stories they could fall into every night. But he also made a vow to protect them, yes, but also to fight for others like them. That vow became the Maddox Foundation, named quietly in their honor, launched with a portion of his returned assets. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide emergency legal aid, housing, and psychological support to homeless minors and at-risk children across the country. And the girls helped him build it. Tally asked questions at every board meeting she attended, even if she didn't understand the answers yet. Myron painted signs and decorated the little office room that served as the foundation's home base. They weren't just symbols, they were partners in his new life. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in amber and soft lilac, Sayer sat on the porch swing with the girls curled up beside him. Tally leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you miss your old house?" she asked. Sayer thought for a moment. No, it was cold and quiet. It felt like waiting for something that never came. Mirren tilted her head. "And now?" He smiled, a small but genuine one. "Now, it feels like I came home." The stars blinked to life above them, and the kittens settled into Mirren's lap. For the first time in years, Sayer wasn't building anything for investors or headlines. He was building something real. A family. It was a brisk autumn morning when the invitation arrived. A white envelope embossed with a gold seal lay neatly on the doormat of the farmhouse. Inside, on thick ivory paper, was a handwritten note from Judge Blythe Havershaw herself, inviting Sayer Grave to speak at the National Justice Reform Summit in Washington, D.C. It was an annual event attended by lawmakers, attorneys, and activists from across the country, a place where change was proposed, challenged, and sometimes born. Sayer read the letter twice before setting it down on the kitchen table. He turned to see Tally and Myron eating cereal at the counter, still in their pajamas, arguing playfully over who got to sit by the window. He'd once spoken on stages about artificial intelligence, data privacy, and ethical algorithms. But this invitation felt heavier. This was not about innovation. This was about injustice. Personal, painful, and raw. When he accepted the invitation, the media swarmed again, framing his attendance as a dramatic return to the spotlight. But Sayer didn't care for attention anymore. He cared about telling the truth, not his own, but the one that had almost been buried forever. At the summit, he walked into the grand auditorium, not in a suit, but in a simple navy sweater and slacks. No security detail, no publicist. Just him, a single microphone, and a story that still throbbed beneath his ribs. The audience quieted as he stepped up to the podium. The silence felt different than in the courtroom. It wasn't laced with judgment. It was waiting. "My name is Sayer Grave," he began, "and I'm not here to talk about technology today. I'm here because I almost went to prison for a crime I didn't commit. And the only reason I'm standing here now is because two homeless 9-year-old girls found the courage to walk into a courtroom and tell the truth when no one else would." He told them everything about the forged documents, the betrayal by his former CFO, the broken legal process that ignored him because he didn't fit the mold of a victim. He spoke about Tally and Mirren, about the proof they carried in a worn envelope, and how the system was ready to throw him away without ever looking deeper. Justice should not depend on headlines, he said, or on wealth or on luck. It should depend on the truth and the willingness of this system to listen to it, no matter who speaks it. He paused, scanning the room. If two little girls can see the truth when no one else will, then maybe it's time we stopped pretending our courts are always blind. Maybe it's time we open our eyes. When he finished, the room didn't explode with applause. It was quiet again, reverent, almost humbled. Then, slowly, people stood. First a few, then more. A standing ovation not of noise, but of respect. Later that day, he was invited to meet with several lawmakers. They discussed implementing an independent oversight program for financial crime cases and legal representation reform for defendants assigned public counsel. He didn't push for credit. He pushed for change. Back home, Tally and Mirren watched the speech online with Miss Eleanor, curled on the couch under a shared blanket. When Sayer walked through the front door late that evening, they ran to him as if he'd returned from battle. "Did they listen?" Tally asked. He smiled, his voice soft. "They did more than that. I think they heard you." The girls beamed, because this time, their voices had traveled all the way to the Capitol, and the world finally couldn't look away. Winter came softly that year. The farmhouse wore a crown of snow, its roof lined with icicles that caught the early morning sun like tiny glass daggers. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and the laughter of children echoed faintly through the frosted air. Inside, the warmth was real. Wood crackling in the fireplace, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven, and a feeling of peace that had once seemed impossible. Sayer Graves stood by the window, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, watching Tally and Mirren make snow angels in the backyard. They were bundled up in thick coats and mismatched scarves, their breath puffing clouds into the air. The orange kitten, now a plump and confident house cat, chased their mittens through the snowdrifts. Sayer couldn't help but smile. Not the calculated smile of a man posing for investors, a real one. One that reached his eyes. It had been nearly 6 months since the trial ended. Hubert Farrow had finally been captured in a remote villa in Croatia by Interpol agents. He was awaiting extradition, facing charges that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. The FBI had personally thanked Sayer for his cooperation, and especially the two girls whose bravery unraveled the truth. Their story had made headlines around the world, but fame was never the goal. That afternoon, a delivery van pulled up outside. A tall man in a uniform stepped out, holding a large envelope with a golden seal. Sayer opened the door. "Mr. Grave," the man asked. "Delivery for the Maddox twins, from the office of the president." Sayer raised a brow and took the envelope with quiet curiosity. He called the girls inside, their cheeks pink from the cold, and handed it to them. They tore it open together, their small fingers fumbling with the thick paper. Inside was a letter on official White House stationery, along with 2 polished medallions. The letter read, "For extraordinary courage, integrity, and service to justice, the United States of America presents the Medal of Civilian Honor to Miss Tally Maddox and Miss Myron Maddox." The girls stared at it, wide-eyed. "Are we in trouble?" Mirren whispered. Sayer laughed and pulled them both into a hug. "No," he said softly. "You're heroes." A few days later, a small ceremony was held in D.C. Intimate, without cameras, just as they requested. The president himself knelt to pin the medals to their jackets and whispered something only they heard. Later, Tally told Sayer he had said, "The country's proud, but I'm prouder to shake hands with girls like you." After the ceremony, they returned to the quiet life they'd built. But everything had changed. The girls were no longer invisible. They had identities, legal guardianship, and futures. Tally wanted to be a lawyer. Myron wanted to be a writer. Sayer supported both dreams without question. And then came the final surprise. On the anniversary of the trial, Sayer released a letter to the public. It wasn't about redemption or reputation. It was a story, the full story, of betrayal, of near collapse, of 2 little girls who refused to stay silent. He ended it with one simple line. "What saved me wasn't evidence. It was hope. Hope carried in the hands of 2 children the world forgot. If they could believe in me, then maybe we can start believing in each other again." The letter went viral within hours. Across the country, donations poured into the Maddox Foundation. New shelters were opened, new laws were drafted. And in the middle of it all stood Sayer, Tally, and Mirren. Not just as a family, but as proof that one broken system could be healed by love, truth, and the bravery of the smallest voices. That night, after the world had quieted again, the 3 of them sat on the couch, under one blanket. The fireplace crackled. The kitten snored softly between their feet. Myron leaned her head against Sayer's chest. "Are we safe now?" she asked. He wrapped his arms around both of them and whispered, "Forever." And for the first time in all their lives, none of them had to wonder what the next day would bring. It wasn't fear. It wasn't silence. It was home. In writing this story, I wanted to explore what it truly means to be saved, not just in the legal sense, but in the deeply human one. Young billionaire faces sentencing. When Beggar twins burst in with proof that shocks the judge is more than a dramatic headline. It's a quiet rebellion against the idea that power, money, or status are the only forces that move the world. Sometimes it's the overlooked, the forgotten children, the voiceless, the ones who sleep on concrete and still believe in good, that ignite the most radical change. Sayer Grave was a man surrounded by everything, yet saved by those with nothing. And in that reversal lies the heart of this story. The idea that hope can come from the unlikeliest of places, and that truth, when carried with enough courage, can still cut through the noise. In the end, This isn't a story about a billionaire or courtroom victory. It's a story about chosen family, earned trust, and the quiet, powerful decision to protect others when the world looks away. And maybe, just maybe, it reminds us all that no one is ever too small to matter, and no one is ever too lost to be found.